With the budget just around the corner, there has been a lot of talk about as to how the budget can throw focus on ease of doing business and whether or not it can make the process of mergers and acquisitions and raising fund overseas simpler or not. To debate exactly this and what can the budget really spell out in terms of ease of doing business, I have with me two experts who have the wherewithal of both domestic as well as global businesses. Please welcome me in joining Ramesh Swaminathan, the Executive Director and Global CFO, Head Corporate Affairs at Lupin. And I also have with me today Amrish Shah. He's the partner at Deloitte India. Gentlemen, great to have you both on the show. Ramesh, if I can kickstart the discussion with you, because there's so much talk about fundraise overseas, especially in the backdrop of these new age tech companies, IPOs. I mean, that's of course a different topic altogether, and whether or not they should be listed within the homeland boundary of India or overseas. But purely on the subject of fundraise overseas, Ramesh, what can the budget do in order to make things easier on ground?
Thank you for having me on. And I think you hit the nail on the head. When you talk about the fact that there is some reconsideration on this, the fact of the matter is, after Nike and Zomato, I'm told that the need for actually looking at, listing outside is not necessarily true. A lot of companies are actually looking at moving back into India kind of phase. But having said that, when it comes to, in fact, for my company, my own company, for example, we still believe that it's extremely important. When for the first time SEBI came out with those with the guidelines in terms of foreign listing, I was extremely excited. We have, in fact, in our portfolio, a few assets which we believe would certainly get a lot more value outside the country. This is essentially NCE portfolio, biosimilars and the like, where we believe the appreciation would be a lot more. A lot has been done, and of course, the Companies Act has also been amended, but it's not been notified as yet. SEBI has been working on a framework for this purpose also. And of course, both have to be notified. But there are also key amendments in the Companies Act, the FEMA, the Income Tax Act, LODR, substantial acquisition of shares, KYC related requirements, anti-money requirements, and all of that, which needs to certainly be worked on by the government. So there's a lot of work to be done. Specifically on the Companies Act itself, the non-applicability of the prospectus and allotment regulations for issue outside India, that needs to be done. You need to allow for a register of the shareholders to be maintained outside the country. When you speak about FEMA, for example, you need to have enabling provisions to allow Indian companies to list outside the country and issue of shares to persons resident outside India. Then, of course, you should also allow retention of proceeds of foreign currencies overseas. Then, of course, you talk about capital gains. You need to have exemption for transfer of shares between residents outside India for companies listed in foreign jurisdictions. And of course, non-applicability of fair market value considerations for shares to persons resident outside. So all of this needs to be taken into account as well before this becomes a practice in India for the future. But I'm sure it's the government is taking cognizance of all of this, and it'll be a question of time before this is possible.
Yeah, Amrish, if I could just ask you a specific point out of what Ramesh just highlighted. I guess outbound mergers also need to be made tax neutral in order to enable funding from overseas be made easier.
Absolutely. I think if you look at what deals market was in 2021, we made a lot of progress in terms of the number of deals and the volume of deals. Now, India is well placed, from a global perspective, and we can attract more investments if we are able to, create an environment which allows, what you just mentioned. So, for example, if outbound mergers are allowed to be tax neutral, then it opens a very different avenue for our entities to raise money. So, for example, if you recall, during 2021, there was this thriving market for special purpose acquisition companies, or SPAC, as we know, and that became very, very important for companies to raise money. So that was one more avenue that was available. Similarly, Ramesh just mentioned about IPO overseas directly. That allows that monies to be raised abroad. So I think the more avenues we open for our Indian entities, I think the better they will be positioned to take forward their own growth aspirations.
Ramesh, and perhaps you would be able to throw more light in this. You think foreign mergers should be exempt in the hands of shareholders when it comes to just the taxation part?
Yes, absolutely. So you look at any Indian company which has, created entities outside India. And then, when you acquire more entities outside India and you want to fold those entities, which you have acquired at different points of time, because it is a foreign company merging into a foreign company and there is no cash deal here. So I can understand if there was a cash deal, but if there is no cash deal, it's just a share swap, like it happens in a domestic market. I think that exemption is very, very critical, for shareholders to be able to, reorient their businesses once they do more and more acquisition in the best possible way so as to leverage, the synergies and other benefits, of a larger business. And that's very important. So yes, shareholders who are getting shares on mergers of foreign companies should get tax exemption. And we hope that the finance minister will look at it.
I fully agree with you, Amrish. So this is something which a lot of pharmaceutical companies also would be faced with, because we have a lot of operating subsidiaries in various parts of the globe, ranging from Americas to Latin America to Europe and the like. And if we indeed want to grow bigger out there, M&A is obviously a big opportunity, and if that is to materialize, you will have to have these exemptions in place. So if, for example, one of my subsidiaries in America or for the matter in any other part of the globe were to merge into another company out there, I'll be in a situation where I'll have to pay tax in India because it's not an exempt merger. So this is an extremely important step from my perspective as well.
What is an ideal scenario? I mean, should mergers and demergers be permitted to carry forward the losses as well? And then what kind of implications does that have on paper?
Yeah, so, if you look at the current situation in India, when two domestic companies are merging, basically, depending on the type of the company that is merging, whether you are a manufacturing or whether you are, in a certain specified service sector, those losses are allowed to be carried forward. The thought process that the government should have is that so long as it is a merger and, so long as it has other tax neutrality, I think the losses should be allowed to be, given, carry forward into, the merged entity. Because many times, what we've seen is that, there are conditions which, are not possible to fulfill. So, for example, you take, a solar power company. There are conditions of utilization. Now we know that the solar energy is only either 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day, depending on, whether it is winter or whether it is summer. And if you have 50% utilization of that as one of the conditions, it becomes, practically impossible, for that company ever to carry forward losses from one place to another on a merger. And you may want to aggregate all your, such companies to be able to get the best results from an operating perspective. So I think there are situations which, should allow more flexibility in mergers. Because that's when I think, we will be able to see the best results from an operating perspective. And, several companies which, are not doing too good and having losses can be revived also.
So, Ramesh, to sum it up, would you say that, reduce compliance on deals and that's only the way forward? Reduce the headache and only then can it be made easier for Indian companies to raise money overseas, to go ahead and merge and acquire companies abroad?
Before he answers that question, may I also, carry forward one other point, which I think is a sore point insofar as companies are concerned in India. Last year there was an amendment insofar as the deductibility of goodwill is concerned. Goodwill is inevitable in any merger, or any acquisition in India. Once you do that, because it's basically, the difference between the consideration that you paid and the fair value of those assets. The fact is, it was allowed some time ago, but the 2021 Act negated that. I would think that, if you really want to encourage M&A and if you want companies to become bigger, it's important for the goodwill also to be made tax deductible. And I think that's an extremely important step in the right direction if it comes through.
Yeah, and just to supplement, what Ramesh just mentioned, I think, especially this is very, very critical when, it is a paid goodwill, when there is a cash deal and, the seller has been subjected to tax on, that side of the spectrum. So
True.
we can understand that, when there is a tax neutral deal, you may not want to give up, depreciation break on goodwill. But when there is, a taxable deal, as we call it, then I think it becomes even more imperative that, this is made available. Because I think it's an important element, and it's not like we will be an exception in the world, because goodwill deduction is available whether it is the US and some of the other developed countries. So I think it's important that we also have a relook at it. While I know it's just 1 year back, but we sincerely urge the government to relook at it.
It's not merely in America or advanced countries, it is also in developing markets like Brazil, etc. Goodwill is allowed as actually a deductible expenditure. So I don't think India is actually missing out if we were not to do that.
Sure, we'd just be aligning ourselves with global practices. Amrish, aside of that, how else can the government this time around in the budget perhaps encourage more domestic participation? I mean, investment by domestic funds, investment by family offices in listed entities.
Yeah, so I think both, if you see the growth of a lot of the Indian unicorns, there has been contribution by domestic funds as well as, the family offices. I think today the big disadvantage that, the funds or the family offices have is, the capital gains tax rate on a long-term basis is double the rate that, they have to pay versus, a non-resident, a private equity fund, if one were to put it, or a non-resident company. And that puts them at a disadvantage vis-a-vis, the non-resident. So today, while they may have the ability to put in the money and funds and, grow, but, over a period of time, because of a higher tax rate, their ability to reinvest gets, truncated. And, when anybody looks at, a rate of return on the investments, they will have a slightly lower rate of return compared to any non-resident. So they have a disadvantage position. So one thing that they need to look at and is to bring the tax parity between a domestic fund and a private equity fund or a non-resident investment on unlisted securities in particular.
Sure. Ramesh, would you like to conclude and add anything more to what's being discussed and how the government can ease really doing businesses abroad?
So I think two things which I would put it. I think the compliance part can be eased. In an M&A today, we have a lot of new things that have come over the last year and a half. Like tax deduction or tax collection it shows on unlisted securities. I mean, unnecessarily creating more compliances. The second, I think, which is a fundamental thing which they can look at, is can they allow group taxation policy to be there, which means that if you are a group of companies, you file a single tax return for that group, versus filing individual tax returns for every company in the group on a standalone basis. We already have consolidated accounts, as part of our accounting standards. Why not now, transgress and see that if we can do it for tax also? I think that would be a big, bold change, if they can do it. It will also ease a lot of, post-merger compliances that, companies have to go through.
Yeah, this rule kind of exists in America, where if you have 80% ownership in any company in America itself, then potentially you could actually consolidate as a group, and you're entitled to set off the losses of one company in the profits of yet another. That would be a very good thing for India to kind of emulate as well.
Okay, gentlemen, we've set the agenda. Now it's just a day's wait, literally, to find out what the budget actually entails. Fingers crossed in this one. But Amrish, Ramesh, both of you, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking with us today on ET Now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.